Cairo, 1936. The black-robed swordsman flourishes his blade. Indiana Jones draws his revolver. One shot, fight over. Everyone remembers the joke. Almost no one knows the gun. Prop researchers at Indy in the Internet Movie Firearms database have documented something most viewers never realized. The revolver that fired in that scene wasn't the American .45 that appears in studio close-ups. It was a British Smith Wesson .455 hand ejector, a military weapon chambered for a cartridge the British adopted because smaller rounds had failed to stop determined attackers in colonial conflicts. 8 years later, the last Crusade put another revolver in Harrison Ford's hands. Small Arms Review identified it by serial number 15211, a genuine Webley WG Army model. A Victorian officer's sidearm designed over a century earlier for men who expected close-range violence. These weren't props dressed up to look dangerous. These were the weapons imperial armies and American expeditionary forces actually trusted to end fights fast. The real Indiana Jones revolvers were more lethal than most fans ever imagined. Welcome to Wild West Revealed. These revolvers didn't emerge from Hollywood prop closets by accident. They came from battlefields, from imperial outposts, from the kind of close-range violence that demanded weapons built to end fights fast. The Smith Wesson M1917 was born from American desperation. When the United States entered World War I in 1917, Colt couldn't produce enough M1911 pistols to arm the troops shipping out to France. The Army needed sidearms immediately. While Smith & Wesson answered by adapting its second model, 44 hand ejector, a proven large frame revolver, to chamber the same 45 ACP cartridge the M1911 used. For the first time, a revolver could share ammunition with a standard service pistol. That mattered in the trenches. The Webley WG Army model came from a different world entirely. Henry Webley and John Carter filed British patent number 4070 in March of 1885, creating a top-break revolver that would define British officer sidearms for decades. But the WG was never general issue military equipment. It was a private purchase weapon, bought with an officer's own money when he expected to actually use it. Both revolvers shared a common ancestor, colonial violence. The British adopted the massive .455 caliber specifically because smaller rounds had failed to stop determined attackers in frontier conflicts. The M1917's 45 ACP traced its lineage to the same problem. American forces in the Philippines had discovered that .38 caliber revolvers couldn't reliably stop a charging Moro warrior. The solution in both cases was the same: bigger bullets, heavier bullets, bullets that would end a fight with one shot. Lieutenant Roderick McLeod of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers carried a Webley WG Army M1896 through the Boer War. That specific revolver, documented, preserved, sits today in the National Army Museum. By the 1930s, these weren't antiques. They were proven, available, the kind of serious hardware a well-traveled man might actually own. If you're learning something new about the guns behind the movies, hit that like button and subscribe. The real details are just getting started. The Smith & Wesson M1917 that appeared in Raiders of the Lost Ark was a shortened version of the original military sidearm. The standard M1917 had a 5.5-inch barrel. The Clytus Raiders prop was cut to approximately 4 inches. More compact, easier to draw from under a leather jacket. 45, ACP, 6 rounds, double action and single action both. The standard military version weighed about 2 pounds 4 ounces and measured 10.79 inches overall. Muzzle velocity ran around 830 feet per second with the standard 230 grain surface load. Those numbers meant something specific. So the 45 ACP was developed because the Army needed a man-stopper. The M1917 delivered it. Between October 1917 and January 1919, Smith & Wesson produced approximately 163,635 of these revolvers. The government paid $14.75 each at first, later $15.60. Mass production, wartime urgency, guns built to be used hard and discarded if necessary. The innovation that made it work was the half-moon clip, a stamped metal crescent holding 3 rimless 45 ACP rounds. Traditional revolvers needed rimmed cartridges. The half-moon clips let the M1917 fire the same ammunition as the M1911 pistol, and they made extraction fast. Pop the cylinder, dump the clips, reload. The low-slung, quick-draw holster you've seen in every Western, invented in the 1920s for silent films. The real M1917 was carried in military flap holsters, the M1909, M2, and M4 patterns. Secure, practical, not flashy. But the American revolver wasn't the only gun on set. Across the Atlantic, British prop houses had something older. The Webley WG Army model was a gentleman's fighting tool. .455 caliber, 6 rounds, top break action with automatic extraction. 6-inch barrel on the standard pattern, 2 pounds 8 ounces, overall length around 11.25 inches. Production estimates based on serial numbers, ranging from 1320 to 22,126, suggest roughly 20,000 were made before production ended in 1914. The Historical Breech-Loading Small Arms Association describes the WG as highly dependable and exceptionally smooth in double action. The top brake system was the key. Unlatch the frame, pivot downward. The automatic extractor throws all 6 spent cases clear in one motion. No fumbling with an ejector rod. No loading gate to work around. Open, dump, reload, close, fast and deliberate. Officers purchased their own holsters to match. The WG was expensive, serious, and built for men who expected close-range trouble. Cairo, 1936, or at least that's when the scene is set. Everyone remembers the moment. The black-robed swordsman flourishes his blade, spinning it with theatrical menace. Indiana Jones, exhausted and fed up, draws his revolver. One shot, fight over. Silently became one of the most iconic beats in adventure film history, a joke about practicality defeating theatricality. But the gun that fired that shot almost certainly wasn't the American .45 that appears in close-ups elsewhere in the film. Prop researchers at Indy and the Internet Movie Firearms Database have documented something most viewers never realized. Raiders of the Lost Ark used multiple revolvers from different prop suppliers for different shooting locations. The Stembridge Gun Rentals M1917 type appears in U.S. studio close-ups. But the firing scenes, including the swordsman moment, were filmed with British prop houses. Bapty and Company supplied a Smith Wesson .455 hand ejector, Mark II for that footage. Same general look, different gun, different caliber. The revolver that killed the swordsman was a British military weapon chambered for the massive .455 Webley cartridge, a round designed to stop men at arm's length in colonial conflicts and trench warfare. The Stembridge M1917 can be identified in specific frames by its distinctive sight blade and grip damage. That's evidence-based prop identification, not fan guesswork. Different guns left different fingerprints on film. 8 years later, another revolver appeared in another iconic scene. Indiana Jones in The Last Crusade and the biplane dogfight sequence. Indy fires a revolver from the cockpit while his father tries to shake off a German fighter. Small Arms Review identified that specific weapon, a Webley WG Army model, frame serial 15211. That's not a prop number. So that's a real Victorian-era officer's sidearm. The gun Harrison Ford waved around in that cockpit was designed by Henry Webley and John Carter over a century earlier for men who expected to kill at arm's length. Movie armories often used genuine period weapons because they looked right and functioned correctly for blank fire. The props were the real thing. What the screen never showed was what those cartridges were designed to do. The .455 Webley threw a bullet weighing 262 to 265 grains. Slower than the .45 ACP, 6 to 700 feet per second, but broad and heavy. The British adopted that caliber specifically because smaller rounds had failed in combat. These weren't theatrical props with loud blanks. These were the weapons Imperial armies trusted to end fights. If you've made it this far, you clearly care about the details behind the movies. Drop a like so I know to keep digging into stories like this. The real Indiana Jones revolver was never a single gun. It was a cluster of heavy service revolvers, all more serious than casual viewers assume. Raiders alone used at least two distinct types. The Stembridge .45 ACP M1917 type handled U.S. studio work. The Bapty .455 hand ejector, or Mark II, handled UK and Tunisia-related shooting. Different locations, different armories, different guns, but all of them large-caliber military revolvers built for close-range violence. The cartridges tell the story. The .45 ACP pushed a 230-grain bullet at around 830 feet per second. The .455 Webley was slower but heavier. A broad projectile optimized for close-quarters effect. Both were designed around the same logic. Heavy bullets that would stop a fight at arm's length. Either one would have felt serious in recoil compared to smaller European service pistols of the 1930s. These weren't gentlemen's accessories, and they were designed for the same purpose British officers carried them to the Boer War and American doughboys carried them to France. The originals still exist, though not the film props themselves. The Smithsonian holds period examples of both the Smith Wesson M1917 and a Webley WG revolver. These aren't screen-used pieces, but they preserve what these weapons looked like before prop houses modified them. So the National Army Museum holds a documented Webley WG Army M1896 associated with Lieutenant Roderick MacLeod of the Royal Dublin Fusiliers. That's verified provenance, a real officer's sidearm from the Boer War. At least one production-used Raiders revolver is reported in private hands. The Last Crusade, Webley, serial 15211 Coxet, was identified by Small Arms Review, but its current location isn't publicly documented. The serial number means researchers can potentially trace that specific gun through history. The M1917's legacy continued after the war. Smith & Wesson's .45 ACP revolvers evolved into the Model 22 and later the Model 625 Durs, competition guns still prized by shooters today. The Webley top break action remained distinctive. Nothing else looked or worked quite like it. Raiders of the Lost Ark came out in 1981. The Last Crusade followed in 1989, both directed by Steven Spielberg, both starring Harrison Ford, both featuring revolvers that were more historically significant than most viewers ever realized. The myth that persists is simple. Indy carried just some old revolver. Generic, interchangeable, a prop. The reality is more interesting. These were World War I trench revolvers and Victorian officers' sidearms, chambered for cartridges specifically designed to stop men in close combat. The prop departments reach for serious guns because serious guns look right. The weight is different, the presence is different. A 2.5-pound service revolver built to survive trench mud and colonial dust has a gravity that a lightweight replica never matches. And the Indiana Jones revolvers weren't dangerous because Hollywood dressed them up. They were dangerous because they were the real thing, and the real thing was always designed to kill. That's what the movies never explain. The swordsman scene works as a joke because the gun represents modern, practical lethality versus theatrical tradition. But the gun itself came from a tradition just as old and far more lethal than any blade flourish. British officers bought Webley WGs because they expected close-range fights, where a heavy bullet was the difference between walking away and bleeding out in the dust. The guns that armed Indiana Jones were built for exactly the kind of world he inhabited, violent, unpredictable, and unforgiving of second shots. If you made it this far, you care about the truth behind the movies. So drop a like and subscribe for more deep dives into real history, and share this with someone who thinks they know everything about Indiana Jones.